Friends, greetings from somewhere in the southern mid part of the great state of Pennsylvania. If you have not been following us as of late, we've been driving this across country here, and this is the 2017 MINI Cooper S Convertible. We are one of the first to drive it. This was like the first time it's been shown. So we've been doing this very cool like travel log type episodes. If you haven't seen them yet, you should go check them out. And we're also doing a full first drive review. We've been very busy on this trip. So why don't, while we're working on that stuff, let's you and I go through a tech review, and let's start where we always start, even though we have a nice lake view here. And this guy's just chilling on the boat over there. Let's start with the engine. Okay, so two things as we bring up this clamshell hood I want to point out here. Number one, please excuse the bugs and the road grime. We've been focusing on a cross-country road trip here, not so much cleaning the car. And then number two, details. Take a look here. Yes, this is a compact car, it's an economy car, even though it's a fun car, but they still take the details to put in this gas-charged strut so you don't have like the prop rod. It's so much more elegant. Anyway, let's press on to what makes the John Cooper works, the John Cooper works. And that is the engine. Now, this is the biggest change probably between this and the Cooper S. So if you remember that Cooper S we drove with Emmy back in January, that car had 190 horsepower. But what was interesting about that engine is that the power came in at a very low engine speed. So the torque came in at like 1,250 RPM. So they used that as the basis for this engine, which means it's a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, direct injected gasoline turbocharged engine. But from there, they bumped up the horsepower to 228, which comes in at a relatively high engine speed, 5,200 RPM, stays flat all the way to 6,000 RPM. But then there's the torque. Now they raised that to 236, but it still comes in at 1,250 RPM. Now the obvious question is, well, how do they do that out of the same engine? Well, we talked about this twin power turbo setup in a number of BMW and now Mini films. And now when I say twin power, for the avoidance of doubt, doesn't mean two turbochargers here. Yes, in a BMW, especially the 7 Series, means two turbochargers, but not here. Basically, it's a suite of like air induction technologies. So you've got the turbocharger, you've got direct injection, variable valve timing, and variable cam lift. So all of that kind of works in conjunction with each other. But to get that horsepower and torque to kind of go and make it into a John Cooper works, what they've done is they've adjusted the boost pressure and they've adjusted how the turbocharger works. That's how we arrive at the higher power. Now, we've got all this stuff. Sadly, this one's an automatic. It is on offer in a manual transmission. So let's press on and talk more about driving dynamics. Now let's press on to the second set of special bits that makes the John Cooper works, the John Cooper works. So if you know anything about the history of these, it has a lot to do with suspension tuning, but in this specific case, it's more to do with torsional rigidity. So let's break it out into two bits. There's the suspension. So the engineers have fitted revised struts in the front, and then they revised the rear suspension, both with an eye towards stiffening the suspension to basically contribute to a stiffer platform to make up for the lack of the roof. Then they've added an anti-roll bar in the front, anti-roll bar in the rear. They've revised the wheels. Now, if I'm honest, usually I'm that guy that says always get the smaller wheels if you can take a car on a track, but don't think you're really taking this on a track. No roll bars, it's convertible. So the 18 inchers, much prettier. But while we're down there, brakes. So what is this? 228 horsepower, relatively small car. Usually you don't see Brembo brakes fitted to a car like this. But what's more interesting, 4 piston calipers on such a small car. Very unusual and very cool. Now let's focus on the structural pieces. So you and I have heard over the years when car manufacturers talk about convertibles, well, we thought about the convertible from the outset. And the idea is you have less engineering when you get to the convertible if you think of the structure, if you're going to build a convertible in the product plan. That's kind of what they did here, but this is a hot rod convertible, which is a bit of an oxymoron because, again, you're not going to take this on a track. So one of the popular things to do to increase the structural stiffness is to put stiffening here in the door sills, which has been done with the JCW. But then the biggest piece, or really the thing that has transformed the structural rigidity of this, comes from that Cooper S that we drove back in January, and that's the stiffening plate here. And that stiffening plate, it basically is sandwiched underneath the subframe, and the idea is to lessen the actual flex, that torsional flex, when you lose the roof. And if you remember when Emmy and I were driving it, especially when Emmy was driving, it actually worked quite well to the point where I feel many Mini owners that don't have these will probably steal them and put them on their own car. Now, let's press on to another change. Now, it's not entirely engine and suspension and stiffening tuning. There are some body changes like a revised bumper, but we're really not here for revised bumpers. We're here for a cool exhaust. And before the first drive review, I do need to do the old rev trick for you. And I normally don't like doing this because I feel like a jackass revving the engine while the car's sitting doing nothing. But have we talked about controlled misfires before? If not, we should. So riddle me this, what does a 228 horsepower four-cylinder engine have in common with a 577 horsepower AMG? The burble, which is a very nice touch. So while we're here, let's focus on the interior. Actually, I should probably get my butt out so you can see it. Now, there are a number of changes going on here, but you really can't see many of them in this specific model. Yeah, you got the red stitching here, and you got the funky dashboard over there, and different coloring and that kind of stuff. But this one is fitted with the fancy leather interior. Normally, I always like the fancy leather interior, especially when you got the piping and the stitching that's contrasting, very British touch. But really, in the JCW, it comes with like these very cool sports seats. They're not leather, but they're incredibly cool. So this is a case where you probably wouldn't want to play the options game. On top of that, there is a neat little touch here. This thing, it's not an option. It's actually an accessory, this little phone holder thing. And normally I wouldn't talk about this, but being I've driven this car now over 1,000 miles, this is actually quite handy. Other than that, it's pretty much standard Mini. Now, we do need to have a conversation with the folks at Mini because every car they give us is an automatic transmission. Like, they promised that this would be a manual transmission in this specific case, but sadly that car went to the guy that the board member from BMW AG who joined the trip. He came last minute and took my car, so I got the automatic. Anyway, well, maybe we'll get that later and we'll drive the stick. And while we're down here, notice it's got this very cool detailed button here. This is what adjusts the dampers. So remember in the Cooper S we talked about the green, the mid-level, and then the sport level of the dampers, the adjustable dampers. You get them here, but this is how you adjust it. I love this detail that, you know, this is the pageantry of a British car. And I think that's about the entire interior. Other than that, probably we want to get some sort of like special Union Jack roof. So in summary, what do we got? Well, we already kind of said this is a four-wheeled rolling oxymoron, a hot rod convertible. One wheel will have to drive together in the full first drive review. Little hint advice about that, it's going to be different than any other full first drive review we've done before in that every separate segment has been shot in a different state. You had the opportunity, so why not? But now I want to turn this around to you guys. And normally I never like talking about the price of these cars because you and I are about the creative aspect about the cars. But here, I'm actually not going to talk about the price. I'm going to leave that for you to talk about. I want you to guess the full retail price in US dollars, or you could translate to yen or euro or pounds, whatever it is. What do you think the full retail price of this one sitting here is? And yes, it has options we don't want, like the leather seats and the automatic transmission, but what is the retail price? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application. Now, if you've been following those episodes we did across the country, you met the people that actually developed that app. But now let's put that aside. And a fun fact, so that color, not British racing green. Instead, it's rebel green. Until I see you next time, bis später.